Hello, my name's Natasha Kaplinsky and this is my little friend Molly. Molly is about 14 years old and she's a little bit deaf and she's definitely very blind, but she can smell very well and she loves sitting on my lap when I read stories, and so she's very excited that I've got a chance to read you a story now. So are you ready? Because I've got the most lovely story to read you. It's called The Summer Story and it's by a lady called Jill Barklem. So if you're sitting comfortably, I'll start. And by the way, Molly always falls asleep in stories and she quite often snores. So if you hear her snoring and she's distracting you, will you say something? Because she does get quite noisy. So this is such a lovely story with lots of pretty pictures so you can follow along. Bramley Hedge. For many generations, families of mice have made their homes in the roots and trunks of trees at Bramley Hedge, a dense and tangled hedgerow that borders the field on the other side of the stream. The Bramley Hedge mice lead busy lives. During the fine weather, they collect flowers, fruits, berries and nuts from the hedge and surrounding fields and prepare delicious jams, pickles and preserves that are kept safely in the store stump for the winter months ahead. Although the mice work hard, they make time for fun too. All through the year, they mark the seasons with feasts and festivities, and whether it be a little mouse's birthday, an eagerly awaited wedding, or the first day of spring, the mice welcome the opportunity to meet and celebrate. Can you see them doing that just there? Look at that. Well, it was a very hot summer. Each day the sun rose high in the blue sky and the fields shimmered in the heat. The hedgerow was quiet. Many of the mice preferred to stay inside their shady cottages, trying to keep cool. Out of doors, the best place to be was down by the stream. The mice gathered there in the afternoon, sat under the bank in the shade and dangled their paws and their tails in the clear water. What a beautiful picture this is. On the banks of the stream were the flour and the dairy mills. The flow of the water turned the wheels which ground the flour and churned the butter for Bramley Hedge. Poppy Eyebright looked after Dairy Stump. She supervised the large vat into which milk, kindly given by some very friendly cows, was poured and stored. The many kitchens where cheeses were drained and shaped, smoked and wrapped, they were also in her care. Molly, can you hear Molly? She's started to snore. Have you started to snore? Are you still with us? Right, what's next? Poppy was not fond of hot weather. Her pats of butter began to melt unless they were wrapped in cool dock leaves, and pots of cream had to be hung in the mill pool to keep them fresh. When her work was finished, she would wander out by the mill wheel, enjoying the splashes of cool water. The flour mill, further down the stream, was run by the miller, Dusty Dogwood. Dogwood was his family name, but he was called Dusty because he was always covered, from tail all the way to his whiskers, with flour dust. Oh, isn't that funny? Look at all that flour. What a beautiful picture. Well, he was cheerful and a very friendly mouse, like his father, his grandfather and his great-grandfather, who had all run the mill before him. He loved the fine weather and he strolled up and down the stream, chatting to the paddlers and the dabblers. His walks took him past the dairy, where he would often see Poppy standing by the stream, looking very pretty indeed. As the long hot days went by, Dusty used to spend more and more time walking up to the dairy, and Poppy used to go out more and more often to the mossy shadows of the mill wheel. Early in June, Miss Poppy Eyebright and Mr. Dusty Dogwood they announced their engagement. Everyone along the hedgerow was delighted. How exciting. Midsummer's Day was picked for the wedding and preparations were started at once. Poppy was so sure the weather would hold that she decided that the wedding would take place on the stream. It was the coolest place and besides, it was very romantic. Dusty found a large flat piece of bark up in the woods, which a party of mice carried down to the water's edge. It was floated with some difficulty just under the mill weir and tethered in midstream by plaited rush and nettle ropes. Poppy prepared her trousseau. Every afternoon she sat in the shade of some tall kingcups, embroidering her wedding dress, which she hid as soon as she saw anyone coming along the path. Look at her working so hard. Molly, are you concentrating? What do you think? Do you think it's a good story so far? I think she does. Well, the wedding day dawned at last. The sky was clear and blue, and it was hotter than ever. The kitchens of Bramley Hedge were full of activity. Cool summer foods were being made. There was cold watercress soup, delicious dandelion salad, honey creams, syllabubs, and meringues. Gosh, that sounds like a feast, doesn't it? The young mice had been early in the morning. They got up early and gathered huge baskets of wild strawberries. Basil selected some white wines, some primrose, meadowsweet and elderflower, and hung them up in the cool rushes. Basil was in charge of all the cellars under the store stump. He was a stout, good-natured mouse with long white whiskers and a sensitive nose for fine wines. Can you see? Molly is fast asleep, totally snoring and really enjoying the book, I'm sure. And I hope you are too, because let's continue. Because in her rooms above the dairy, Poppy dressed carefully. She polished her whiskers and dabbed rosewater behind her ears. Her straw bonnet, which Lady Woodmouse had trimmed with flowers, hung from the bedpost, and her bridal posy lay waiting on the windowsill. She peeped at her reflection in the shiny wardrobe door, took a deep breath, and ran downstairs to join her bridesmaids. Dusty kept his best suit in a basket under the stairs to protect it from moths, but he put it on and tucked a daisy in his buttonhole. I'd better check that barley I ground yesterday, he said to himself. He ran up the steps at such a pace that the whole mill seemed to shake. The wooden floor above him let down a cloud of dust, oh dear, all over his new wedding suit. Bother it, he said, sitting on a stack of corn and looking at his mottled jacket in dismay. There was a thumping on the door below, and his friend Conker called through the letterbox, Dusty, are you ready? It's nearly time to go. Dusty sighed and went morosely down the stairs. As soon as Conker saw him, he began to giggle. Dusty by name, Dusty by nature, he said, trying to remedy matters with his clean handkerchief. The flowery dust swirled and settled about on whiskers, tails, best clothes and buttonholes. The two mice looked at each other and started to laugh. They laughed so much that they had to sit down on a flour bag to recover. The wedding was about to take place at midday, and Dusty and Conker arrived just in time. The guests were all in their finest clothes. 3 young mice dressed in smart blue suits had been chosen as pages and were busily directing everyone to their places. Mrs. Apple discreetly tried to dust down the groom and best man, but to little avail. At last, old Mrs. Eyebright, Poppy's grandmother, spotted the bride and her little bridesmaids coming through the grass. The pages squeaked with excitement and got into place. Every head turned to watch the bride as she made her way through the buttercups and stepped onto the decorated raft. Look how beautiful she looks. The old vole who'd been asked to perform the ceremony stood up and said in a kindly voice, Poppy Eyebright, do you love Dusty Dogwood, and will you love him and care for him for ever and ever? Poppy vowed that she would. Dusty Dogwood, do you love Poppy, and will you love her and look after her for ever and ever? I will, said Dusty. Mrs. Apple blew her nose. Then, in the name of the flowers and the fields, the stars in the sky, and the streams that flow down to the sea, and the mystery that breathes wonder into all things, I pronounce you mouse and wife. All the mice cheered as Dusty kissed his bride, and the bridesmaids threw baskets of petals all over the happy couple. Mrs. Apple wiped a tear from her eye, and then the dancing and the feasting began. First they danced, for no one could keep still, jigs, reels and quadrilles. Mr. Apple proposed a toast. To the bride and groom, may their tails grow long and their eyes be bright and all their squeaks be little ones. The guests raised their glasses and then they danced again. The dancing was so vigorous that the raft bobbed up and down. Gradually, the ropes holding the raft began to wear through, and one by one, look, can you see the little ropes? They snapped until finally the very last one gave way. They were carried into midstream by the current. The young mice squeaked with alarm at first, but as they seemed to come to no harm, they continued with the feast. The raft floated gently past fields of buttercups and meadowsweet, and the voles tending the fires in the pottery came out to wave as the wedding party drifted by. Eventually, the raft was caught in the leafy clump of rushes and forget-me-nots. The ropes were made fast, and the dancing, oh, Molly, are you shaking? Began again. Do you like this bit of the story? Good girl, darling, we're nearly at the end. Well done, sweetheart. Can you watch? The last page. At last the dusk came, golden and misty over the fields. The blue sky slowly darkened and the mice began to think about getting home. All the food was finished up and the pots and pans hidden in the rushes to be collected the next day. They walked back through the field in the evening sun, looking very splendid in their wedding clothes. The old vole was taken back to his first hole, and the rest of the mice gradually made their way home to bed, exhausted but very, very happy. And what happened to Poppy and Dusty? Well, they slipped quietly into the primrose woods. The primroses were over, but there, hidden amongst the long grass and ferns, the wild roses and the honeysuckle, was the cottage in which they had chosen to stay. It was the perfect place for a honeymoon. So there you have it, the end of the summer story. And Molly would like to say thank you for joining us. And if there is anything that you can do to help other children who need help in this very difficult time, please do donate as little as you can or as much as you can. We really would be very, very grateful. So thank you for joining us, and I'll read you another story very soon.